We crossed the Red Sea, taking all of its metaphors with us, coming up on the Accessible Faith Project. Hi there, I'm John, and welcome to the Accessible Faith Project. If you're new here and looking for insights into the Bible, faith and history in ways that engage your brain, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you receive a notification every time I upload a new video. As we continue social distancing, I've been using the Accessible Faith Project to provide worship and devotional resources in addition to my educational videos. This one is a sermon, but as with most of my offerings, learning a little bit of history goes a long way. I have to admit, in my opinion, the scene of the crossing of the Red Sea in the movie The Prince of Egypt is the best version on film. Sure, it's animated, but in that way it can do and capture things that live action films can't, like keeping that sense of wonder and mystery that are a part of it. And maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much. A few weeks ago, we met Moses as the reluctant shepherd living in exile, and we have come a long way since then. Now all of the people of Israel are gathered at the shore at the edge of the sea. They find themselves caught between certain death and the hands of Pharaoh's soldiers, or drowned amongst the sea's dark waters. Pharaoh had let them go after God had struck Egypt with great and terrible wonders, but it wasn't willingly. And by the time that the slaves had made their way toward the seashore, Pharaoh had changed his mind, and he would sooner see the slaves dead than free in another land. Caught between Pharaoh's murderous rage and the sea's angry waters, the Hebrew slaves have no way out, and they feel betrayed. They turn to Moses in desperation and accuse him of leading them to their doom. There's an important bit of dialogue left out of the version that is in The Prince of Egypt. While it is implied, it's left out to move the action forward. And when they reach the shore and it's evident that Pharaoh's army has come to exact their vengeance, the people's fear is tangible. They say to Moses, "Why did you lead us here? Surely we had a better life back there, even if it was merely as slaves in Egypt. You've led us out here to die." But they do have a point. Moses has led them to a dead end, trapped with nowhere else to go by all accounts. Sure, there was a sign of the pillar of cloud and fire, but these elements would not hold back a spear tip or a barbed arrow. The soldiers will drive the panicking refugees into the sea to be swallowed up and drowned by the great and terrible deep. And if there was one thing that the Hebrews feared more than the Pharaoh's army, it was the sea. They are a people who like dry land. They like solid ground. They were a people who lived away from the shorelines, leaving sailing and plying the waters to the Phoenicians or the Egyptians. The water was a dark and terrible place, a swirling mass of chaos filled with untold horrors. Going into the water was to suffer a fate worse than the soldier's blade. And for them, Moses had led them literally to a dead end. Our Western eyes tend not to see the sea in the same way. Even our hymns, shaped by British mariner culture, have made the waters of the sea something to be enjoyed, respected, to be sure, but enjoyed. I enjoy being out on a boat. I've been on cruises. I've swum with turtles while snorkeling. The sea is a place of wonder and fun for many of us, not for the people of Israel. To get an idea of how they saw it, we are in the midst of the most active hurricane season in years. Cyclonic storms are a yearly risk to life and limb and remind us how powerful these untamed seas are. These storms are more like the great and terrible waters that the Israelites know. Those images of horror, of churning chaotic waters swallowing communities whole, that gives us a glimpse of the kind of terror that the fleeing slaves faced. But in addition, the Red Sea in Hebrew is better translated as the Reed Sea. But there's also a play on words here that doesn't make the translation. It can also mean ending, as in end of the road. Coming up against the sea was the end of the road, and given a choice of going back to slavery or even the soldier's spear seemed like a far more reasonable option. It is in this darkest of places, it is here in this time of terror that we experience the greatest of God's wonders. At this time of greatest despair by the Hebrews, God tells Moses to hold out his staff and point to the one place where the Israelites would not go. And suddenly the waves of the deep are driven back and it's divided. Through a dead end, a place of certain death emerges a path on dry land. They stand at the shore, staring at this path before them, a new way, just when all seemed lost. And it makes for good theater. A people who struggle under the burden of oppression and slavery, who seek to taste freedom, and at last they are delivered through the waters of the sea by the hand of God. And we tend to think they lived happily ever after. After all, the crossing of the Red Sea in most film editions happens at the very end. But that's our first mistake. You see, the crossing of the Red Sea, or more appropriately the Reed Sea, is all about new beginnings. It's not the end of the story, it's just the beginning. It has been about the struggle for freedom until this point, but the real story begins once they have it. If we think of it this way, the crossing of the Red Sea comes in chapter 14 of the book of Exodus. Exodus has 40 chapters. We're barely a third of the way into the book, and we're ready to say that they lived happily ever after without reading the rest of it. The crossing of the Red Sea was not an ending, but a beginning of a new story. God gives them a safe passage through the very place they feared the most. Through that which we thought was a dead end, God carves a path to a new beginning. And through this dead end, God calls them to move through the waters, to move through this end of the road to a new beginning, a new hope, and a new relationship with God. And this is what begins the story about a long, fresh path to the promised land. Our faith is a faith that is all about new beginnings. Where other people see the end of the story, we see the start of something new, something extraordinary, but something that also involves a long and sometimes difficult road. Typically in September, we are celebrating new beginnings. The summer's over, the new school year has begun, our children are going into new grades and new programs that start throughout the community. We return from our summer holidays and vacation times to what is the real new year in Canada. But this year, the anxiety level is much higher because of our current experience with COVID-19. Still, it seems appropriate that we have one of the best stories recalling new beginnings in uncertainty as our text for this Sunday. As with any new beginning, there is a sense of fear and wondering about what is coming next. A number of you might be starting a new program. Some of your children or grandchildren are going to new schools. Mine certainly are. And some of you are starting at a new school yourself. All of us are walking on eggshells, hoping that we are not at the beginning of the edge of the virus's next wave. But all new beginnings come at the end of something else, and it also comes with a sense of nervousness and unease. And sometimes we can't see the new beginnings and feel trapped amidst the chaos of a dead end. Sometimes new beginnings come out of something we never thought possible. God calls us to move through those dark and terrible places to a new beginning, to a new hope, a new life. Standing with the Israelites on the shore of the sea, we realize what God has done. It is no coincidence that some of the language used in this story echoes that of creation. God brings order to the primordial chaos of creation, dividing the great waters and forming dry land. Parting the waters of the sea was a reminder that we are part of God's creation, and it is through the Exodus it begins a new relationship with God and humanity. God delivered and redeemed the slaves out of Egypt, brought order to chaos, and shown the great powers of the earth who's really in charge. The people of Israel would be forever changed, for this would finally end their lives of slavery and bring them into a new chapter with a relationship with God. When the waters rolled back in the front of the fleeing Hebrews, it was still their own choice to flee through this new opening. God did not push them into it, nor were they driven into it by Pharaoh's forces. Remember that they feared the sea more than they feared Pharaoh. They had the choice to take that step, to overcome that deep-seated dread, and to put their trust in God. Taking that step through waters into the new beginning can be frightening, but it is also truly where the challenge lies. In seeing this as a new beginning, maybe we can listen and see what paths God is calling us to take, daring us to move in new ways and trusting that God is there in the midst of it all. Amen.